Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Ankush here from Alif Consulting. Today we are going to talk about Azure Service Endpoint and Azure Private Link. Well, let's move to the Azure Service Point first and then we'll move to the Azure Private Link. So Service Endpoint is basically provide us the access to the Azure PaaS resources to the resources which is deployed in the virtual network over the secure manner and over the Microsoft backbone network. And with the service endpoint, it allows us to connect the critical resources which is deployed in the Azure through a Microsoft backbone network to the VMs which has been deployed in the virtual network. So if you are enabling a service endpoint in a specific subnet, you will be only able to connect that specific service to that subnet only. If you're trying from the other subnet that doesn't have that service endpoint enabled, you would not be able to do that. So it provides us the secure access to the service over the Microsoft backbone network. Well, here are the key benefits of having the service endpoints. It's improved the security. It's provide us optimal route for Azure service traffic for virtual network. Simple to set up and less management overhead. So it's just a endpoint. You just need to enable on the subnet. That's it. As soon as you do that, the connection will be going to travel over the Microsoft backbone network. So cost and limitation, there is a no limitation and there is a no cost of using the service endpoint. And this is how your service endpoint connectivity looks like. So if you see your network access for Azure virtual machines and the Azure storage account is happening over the service endpoint, but at the same time, internet for Azure storage account is not allowed. So traditionally what happened, the Azure storage account have a endpoint, the public endpoint, which basically a DNS name to access the storage account, and the data basically the connection travel to that storage account is happen over the public internet. But if you're enabling a service endpoint and you don't need to worried about the internet, so the connection basically between storage and the virtual machine in this diagram is happening over the Microsoft backbone network, as we have enabled the service endpoint on the virtual network, sorry, in the subnet where the VM is deployed. Well, let's move to the Azure Private Link. So Azure Private Link enable us the access to the Azure PaaS services and Azure hosted partner over the private endpoint in the virtual network. So in this case, what happened? There is a private endpoint which we create, this which is basically work as a NIC, and that NIC basically, which is also known as a network interface, is basically attached to this service, and then we can basically connect that service over the virtual network using the private IP, right? So that's where private link enable us a secure connection in and is a private connection in between the virtual network or the paired virtual network or to the on-premise location as well, if we are having a express route or site-to-site connectivity. Well, here are the key benefits. It's provide the private access to the Azure platform, not to the Azure platform, but the services which has been deployed in the Azure platform. On-premise and paired network, so it's provide us the access to the on-premise and the paired network. Protection protected against the data leak, since this connection is traveling in between the virtual network, so it provides us the protection for the data leak. Global reach, yep, definitely it's have a global reach and extend to your own services. So if you have any on-premise services or any other services which is deployed and connected to the Azure on the site to site or express route, you can basically extend that service, extend your private link to that service as well. Well, this is how your pricing look like. So there is a no charge of using the private endpoints, but you will be get charged for data processing. You will be charged for Azure DNS, and then you will be charged for the endpoint, because if you want to create a private link, you need to have a endpoints, and that endpoint will be give you the NIC, and then you will be going to create a private link to that NIC to your virtual network. Here are the limitations. So you can have 1000 private endpoint created for a virtual network, and then you do have a private endpoints limitation for subscription. So these are the bunch of limitations which basically going to be apply if you're using a private endpoint. Well, this is how your private link connectivity look like. So if you see, we do have a private endpoint which is associated with the VM, and then we do have a private link which is basically associated with the standard load balancer. So in this case, you see whatever the connection basically coming from on premise or through the from the VM, it's happening, it's coming to the endpoint which is our NIC, and then we have a private link to the load balancer. So in this case, what is going to be happen, the traffic basically which is traveling to this multiple networks or to the on-premise network, all the traffic is traveling inside the VNet. So it's not going to the any internet, it's not going to the Microsoft backbone as well. So it's purely a secure manner or a secure way to connect the resources, connect the PaaS resources specifically, because the virtual machine definitely going to get a NIC and then going to get a private IP, but the PaaS resources is not going to get a private IP. With the private link or with the and with the private endpoint and private link, you would be able to create a private IP for the PaaS services as well. And another thing is, Microsoft do recommend to use the private link as well. They, because this allow us to basically have a private connection to the Azure PaaS services. Well, here are the few difference between service endpoints and the private link. So access with the service endpoint, definitely it's going to be a public routable IP addresses. With the private, it's going to be get a private IP. So definitely the data traveling in between the resources will be going over through the virtual network. Well, with the private link, we do have a inbuilt data protections, and with the service endpoint, traffic need to route through the NVR firewall for the protection. Service endpoint is not easy to restrict the on-premise traffic. With the private link, it's easy to restrict the on-premise traffic because the data is traveling in between the VNets or from the on-premise to the VNet using the express out or VPN tunnels. Well, complexity, endpoint do have a little bit complexity, and private endpoint have a little extra complexity because you need to manage the resources as well. Cost, there is a no cost of having a service endpoint. With the private link, definitely there is the cost for DNS queries and the data basically coming inside, processed through the private link. And then availability, both services are not available for all the resources. uh, they are available for specific resources like a database, Azure virtual Azure storage accounts, and then app services. So all of them are not completely available for all the service which has been available in the Azure, specifically talking about the platform as a service. Well, let's move to the demo. So in the demo, I will be going to show you how you can create a private link, how you can attach it to this resource, and how you can use that private link to connect the resources. Well, in my case, I already have a one SQL server created, and this SQL server have a private endpoint here, which private endpoint will be used to connect with this database. And when you're using this private endpoint, the data is traveling over the internet. So if you see in my VM, I do have already connected with this database using the public endpoint, but I really want to secure it. I want to make sure the data basically traveling to this database server or all the data basically which deployed in the server through the private network only. So what I can do, I can go ahead and create the private link as well. So how I can do that? For that, I need to go here and I need to search for private link. And for that, I need to create first a private endpoints, and then I need to create a private link service to connect both of them. Well, let's go ahead and create a private endpoint first. All right, so it's going to be in the this resource group, and I think I have deployed in the east west location. So let's give it a name, PE, which is a private endpoint. Next, I need to define connection method, so I'm using a default, and then I need to select what kind of type of resource is going to be. So you see these are the bunch of services which are available to connect over the private endpoint. So in my case it's a SQL, so it's this last one. So you do see we do have a private endpoint for MS SQL, Postgres, and then a managed instance, and then the normal PaaS services as well. So I'm selecting a second one, and then I need to select the server. That's it. It's fine. I need to set up the resource type, resource, and the subcategories. In subcategory, it's automatically picking up the sub resources. That's it. I need to select the network, in which network I want to deploy this endpoint. So in my case, it's not showing the virtual network because I might be selecting a wrong reason. So let me see in which uh, reason my database server has been deployed. Most probably it's in the East US, but let's go ahead and reconfirm one more time. Well, you see it's in the East US. All right, I think I have deployed the virtual machine in the different region. Yep, the virtual machine which I've deployed in the different region. So let's go ahead and deploy a one virtual network in the East US as well. So it would not giving me the options to deploy here. So what I need to do, I need to first deploy a virtual network. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and create one virtual network in the East US. And then what I'll do, I'll get this paired with another network, and then we'll able to connect over the private IP. That's it. So let's keep it dot 0 slash 24. That's it. And I need to put subnet name. Okay, it should be 25. That's it. Well, I really don't want to do that. All right, so let's get this virtual network is deployed, and then I will be able to see the virtual network here. So I think let's go ahead and close this, because at the end of the deployment of the virtual network, we need to start it again from the beginning to create the private endpoint. So this virtual network is basically is being deployed. So let's wait for this deployment to get completed, and then we will be going to create a private endpoint and then the private link to connect the resources. Well, this deployment is get completed. So let's go back and create the private endpoint. Well, for that I am selecting my existing resource group, in which I already have deployed a SQL server. It's going to be East2S, and the name of this private endpoint is, that's it. I need to select the resource type is going to be a SQL server, and then the resource is going to be the server which I have created, and the sub resource is automatically picked up. And then here I can select the network, and then I can select the subnet. And then, do you need a private endpoint integrations? Yes, definitely that's required, because with that one you're going to get a DNS name associated, which you can use to connect with the service. That's it. Let's go ahead and create. So it's going to be run a final validation. Click on create. Well, this deployment is going to be take a few seconds, most probably 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So we need to wait for that. Once that is completed, it will be going to complete this deployment, and then I will be going to move forward and going to create a private link for that. So this private endpoint is being created. So it's going to be a network interface in here. Well, it's taking a little more time to complete this deployment. So let's wait for it and then we'll move forward. Well, the endpoint is created. Now it's deploying a private DNS for that because we have enabled the private endpoint integrate. Sorry, it's now the private endpoint is basically created. Now it's deploying private DNS for that because we have enabled, like, we want to have a private DNS so that we can resolve the DNS name for this endpoint which is associated with the database. So Well, this deployment is still taking a little more time, so let's wait to get this deployment complete. Well, the deployment is completed, so let's go back to the resources. So you will see we have a private endpoint created with this subnet and with this NIC and for this resources. And then if you go to the DNS setting, we would be able to see what is the private IP for the endpoint and what is the DNS name for this endpoint which is associated. Now what we need to do, we need to go ahead and create the private link. For that, we need to create here and click on private link. So I need to select the resource group name and I need to define the link name, and it's going to be in the east US. And then I need to define the load balancer or the stuff which I can use here, and then I can create the private link for the another service. Now the private endpoint is something which is going to become an important part, because as soon as you do that, you would be able to connect with the server over this private IP. So the private endpoint would be going to allow you to connect the resources over the private IP. So if you use this private IP to connect this database, you would be able to connect with the database. So let's go ahead and quickly do that. So in my case, I have a two virtual network, and my another VM which I'm using for this demo is in the another region. So let's go ahead and quickly connect to the each other using the VNet pairing. So let's go and do that. VNet 01. Let's give it a name. Allow, allow, and then I can go ahead and select the name. And then I can select the name which is not pair. Okay. Oh, I think I'm doing something wrong. So pair name, allow. That's it. And, self. Nah, it's not giving me the another one. All right. So I think I will not be able to show you how you can go ahead and connect, how basically how the connection will be look like. But as soon as you did that, as soon as you created a private endpoint, you would be use this private IP of this NIC which is associated with your database, and then here if you go into the connect, you just need to put the private IP here in the name, and then you would be able to connect with this database from here. Well, and the another thing is how you can enable the service endpoint. That's a pretty much simple. You need to go on the virtual network, you need to go on the subnet, and you need to select the server subnet on which you want to enable the service endpoint, and then from here you can select whatever the service endpoint you want to enable. It's like you do have a service endpoint for Active Directory, Cosmos DB, and then container registry, cognitive service, event hub, key vault, service bus, SQL, storage, and web. So you can select all of them, or you can do one by one as well. So as soon as you select them and you click on save, it will be going to allow the connection for the service point over the Microsoft backbone network. Well, that's what I have for you in the demo. I hope you like this video. If you like, please press the like button or subscribe for more upcoming video. If you need any help, please feel free to reach us. Thank you.